Hello and welcome to the final of our four-part series on Sandbox Learning Techniques and Principles. Today we're going to be talking about mixed practice and why it's much better than the traditional blocked practice. Speaking of which, let's talk about what is blocked practice. Well, it's the traditional way that things are taught, whether you're at school, university, or anywhere else. Imagine we're in a maths class. Well, on one day, you may be talking about adding fractions. So your teacher delivers a lecture, you then work on some problems, you probably set some problems for homework, but everything's going to revolve around adding fractions. Then we come to the next day, and then we move on from adding fractions. We're talking now about multiplying fractions. Teachers doing the lesson up on the board, multiplying fractions, all the work you're doing is on multiplying fractions. Then tomorrow you're going to do something different, the day after that, and so on and so forth. Question, what is the problem with this? So if you think back to the last few talks that we've been given, you may notice that the first problem is around learning decay. If you do everything in blocks, the first day, yes, you're talking about adding fractions and you've learnt it, but you've got this big decay. And then the next day you do multiplying fractions, you learn it, and then decay. All of these things, because we're not spacing our practice, because we're not going back and revising it, we're spending all this time learning, forgetting, learning, forgetting, learning, forgetting. It's really, really inefficient. The second problem is a little bit more nuanced, and it's about limited transfer. When you get to the test, which for a lot of you is kind of the main reason why you're learning these things, well, your test is not given to you in these little blocks. It's not saying, first we're going to do questions on adding fractions, then we're going to multiply, then we're going to do geometry, then we're going to do whatever. No, they're all mixed up. And so what happens for a lot of students is that while they're really good if you're told exactly what you need to do or what the question's asking, you get confused often about interpreting the question. And you find that a lot with math for word problems. The issue is not the mechanics a lot of the time, it's that most students just can't work out what the question is asking. And so that's a skill in of itself. So because in the end of the day, you want to do well in the test, hopefully you want to understand, but you want to do well in the tests. Well, if you're going to be tested with everything all jumbled up, you also need to be practicing. Just like if you're playing a sport, training, is great, doing individual drills, but eventually the best practice is proper game time. You can do game practice, but ultimately, time on the pitch, so to speak, is going to be way better than practicing in the nets or on the courts or something like that. So instead of using a blocked approach, a way better way is mixed or interleaving. And so that involves practicing a range of concepts. Instead of just doing every single question on adding fractions on the day that you learn it, you should do, a large part of them on adding fractions, but instead you should bring in a bunch of other ones. So what we see here is, yes, 3 of the questions are on adding fractions, but then you bring in a whole bunch of other concepts. And the benefit of that is by doing this, it actually forces you to do part of spaced repetition, because some of these other concepts, you may not have done for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, some months, or so on. And so it's forcing you to redo some old things. Now, why do we do this? So the reason is the evidence around this is from a researcher by the name of Rohrer, who looked at different groups using either a blocked or a interleaved or mixed approach and worked out which one was better. So what he found was long-term interleaved is way more effective. But in the short term, actually, it's more frustrating. And the reason why that's the case kind of makes sense. If you're doing adding fractions, if you're just in the mode, all I need to do is add fractions, and then you get a test on adding fractions, you're going to do much better than if someone has been mixed up across adding fractions, multiplying fractions, geometry, and so on. It's much easier when you're focused just on one thing. But come test time, well, that's not as relevant because you're not given everything just in one kind of focus go. You're being forced to do that. And so those who have practiced in the same way as they have been tested will do much better. It's the same reason why we encourage all our students, once you've learned the basics, it's really important at some point to do a timed test. Because in the end, you're going to be stressed out under time pressure potentially. You want to practice that. First time you get time pressure shouldn't be in the exam. You should be more comfortable beforehand. So how do we actually do mixed practice? Well, first of all, you want to bring in the old concepts with the new. Just because hopefully your teacher has incorporated some of this stuff, most of the time they won't, so it's up to you to do so. When you're doing something new for class, as part of your study as well, bring in old concepts from yesterday, last week, last term, whenever it is. Second point, for best results, you want to make the concepts a little bit similar. And that's because you want a bit of mental strain. If they're so different, then it's easier to understand that a French concept versus a maths concept. They are different. Whereas within French, if you're talking about different verb types, right, what's happening with ER or IR verbs, they are similar enough where you really have to think and you go, oh, what was it? And it's that thinking, that retrieval practice that is really beneficial to help you remember long term. Third, focus on the long term. As I said before, the study suggests that in the short term, interleaving, really frustrating, feels like you're not learning, even though long term it's way more effective. So push past that initial frustration because it's well worth it. So that brings us to the end of our 4-part series. Stay tuned for more videos and where we go into details about how we can actually use particular techniques to improve your study.